Welcome to Hear Something Good on Women's Health and Longevity. We are so grateful to our period care partner, Always, that can be found at Walgreens, the women's well-being destination, supporting every stage. Together, we're bringing you something good each week on women's health, and it wouldn't be possible without their support. Today, we're talking to Dr. Charis Chambers about how mothers and caregivers can foster dialogue with girls and young women about periods that can build confidence and strengthen bonds. Dr. Charis Chambers is an OB-GYN with fellowship training in pediatric and adolescent gynecology. She's also the founder of the Period Doctor platform that seeks to educate young women on topics related to reproductive health. And she's also the author of the upcoming book, The Period and Puberty Parenting Revolution, which will be coming out next year. We talked to Dr. Chambers last week about period power and why education about menstruation is foundational to lifelong well-being. And we're delighted to have her back. Welcome, Dr. Chambers.
Thank you for having me.
So, why is it so important to talk about periods early? And how can those first conversations between caregivers and girls really shape how they feel about their bodies?
Yeah, so the idea that you should be talking about reproductive health early kind of stems from what I think is human logic. When we think about going through anything in life, we do so with greater confidence and with less anxiety if we are prepared. Too many girls still today have their first period without even knowing what's going on, right? That first drop of blood, they're like, am I dying? Truly. I remember talking to my niece because I noticed that she was going through puberty. And I was like, I don't know if she's had the talk, but it would be a shame if my very niece did not have any type of awareness of what's going on. So I just had a little FaceTime call with her and just said, hey, have you noticed things, and talk with her about the changes. And she said from her mouth, if I had just started randomly bleeding, I would have thought I was dying. And it was so precious because that was her stance. That's what makes sense. So normalizing this process that to a child is going to be weird. Why am I bleeding and it's okay? Whenever I bleed before, it hurts. It's something that we try to fix. We try to address it very quickly, and we make sure that nothing else happened. Usually it's associated with an accident or something that shouldn't have occurred. But this is a different type of bleeding. And I believe that caregivers are the best ones to introduce that because they're the ones who've been nurturing and guiding their children this whole time, right? And so if the person you trust who has guided you through every step of your life says, hey, we got a new step, it feels less jarring, less daunting, and it's the one who's been holding your hand this whole journey. It just makes sense.
Like you said, it's pure logic. So when is the right time then to have this kind of conversation? How early is too early, or when is too late?
My entire stance is once they start bleeding, it is too late. And it's not too late to talk about it and to care about them and to address it with consideration and compassion, but it is too late to have them as prepared as they should be for this inevitable change. And so the general guidance is that reproductive health should be introduced in early childhood. And early childhood is basically before the age of like 10 and 11, those kind of 7 to 10 age years. And so when you think about that, most people aren't quite in full-blown puberty. It's a time in which they've gone through toddlerhood, kind of younger childhood, but those changes are beginning to pop up or they're around the corner. I would argue that there really isn't a too early time period. You do want to make sure you're introducing things in a way that your child can understand and that's appropriate for their level of engagement and comprehension. So we know that all kids are not the same, right? We aren't all at the same maturity level. And sometimes we don't have all of the same tolerances as it relates to sensories, right? And so there might be someone who can't see a very, real life image book. That might be a little much for them. Maybe someone is going to do well if you explain it by using, an analogy or a picture book with like little cartoons and diagrams that aren't too overwhelming. And so introducing it according to your child in a customized approach is the best guidance.
Makes so much sense. So age-appropriate ways to introduce the concept.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the best tips for conversation starters? Sometimes caregivers might be a little hesitant.
Yeah.
They might be a little shy about bringing up the conversation. What's the right way to introduce it? And do you have any tips?
Yeah. So I think the best tip is to one, for the caregiver to really take inventory of how they're feeling and what biases and maybe even fears or traumas they're carrying into this conversation. The other tip is to start as early as possible. If you have started super young, and the reality is we're starting much younger than we realize, because even when you are toilet training your child, when you're potty training, you are teaching them how to care for their body. And the fact that the genitalia is involved in potty training, it actually is a part of that reproductive health picture. And so when we've got a 2-year-old, we say you got to wipe your bottom, and you wipe your bottom differently, and your brother doesn't necessarily always have to wipe or care for themselves differently because your parts are different. So we've already introduced the differences of parts as early as toilet training. And most of us don't realize it, right? Let's talk about what you have noticed. And if you make it okay to talk about observations, especially body observations, in the safety of your home, make it a safe space, then they feel like they can bring it up to you.
Right.
They might even say, hey, this one girl in my class, she started her period. And you say, wow, let's use that opportunity to start. Use that in. So whenever you are given an in, especially an observational in, that removes the burden on you to bring the subject up, and you can just walk into that open door with confidence and kind of without shame.
Makes so much sense. And you kind of set up that comfortable environment. Is there any language to be sure you use or perhaps avoid?
So the language that I think matters when we're introducing topics is not creating a fear-based narrative, right? While these changes in our minds are equated to increased risks, for our child, it is just something new. And so instead of leading with fears that we are mostly holding, for our children, we need to just start with the education piece first. So education, then protection, right? If we leave out the education and we go really, really hard with, you can't do this and we can't, and this, then the kid says, well, I can't even trust my body. I can't trust the world around me. Something terrible has happened and I am no longer safe, right? But if you say, hey, this is what's happening in your body. We've got these parts. We talked about them since you were little. Let me tell you a little bit about those parts. You know how when we go to the beach, certain parts are covered? Those are places that are actually a little different.
And last week when we were talking, you started to bring up something that I think is so relevant to this conversation, which is caregivers have to get comfortable and not
Yes.
feel that these topics are taboo. Tell us a little bit about that and what caregivers can do to get themselves ready, and also how children are receiving this information today.
Yeah, so I was on a call last week talking with multi-generations of women, and we were talking about demystifying and all of these taboo things. And there was a woman on the call who was maybe in her 60s, said, I've got to admit, y'all, I still say my flower. She said that on the call, and I really enjoyed it because that transparency, that openness says, I'm actually letting you know that I still carry something in me, even though I know cognitively, like I know that I should be okay with saying vagina or vulva or, or labia. But something subconscious within me still wants to use that flower piece. And so having conversations amongst ourselves, right, where we can be vulnerable, where we can be imperfect, that's an appropriate thing to do amongst ourselves.
And in that process, I think probably a lot of people maybe just don't know as much as they wish they had known when they were growing up about their biology, about this whole transition period, and why it's also kind of exciting. I mean, I think this idea that it's sort of something that people don't want to talk about, they want to avoid, is sort of putting a negative cast on something that's really quite positive. What can we do to counter that?
It is a positive thing. And if we think about the development of puberty and periods as a normal milestone, it is as normal as the social smile, as your baby sitting up, as your baby learning to roll over, all of those things, the losing of the baby teeth and getting adult teeth, it is all very normal. And so sometimes when parents are having a lot of difficulty accepting the inevitability of change and they're grieving their baby and all of those things that are appropriate emotions, I talk with them about, tell me what you would feel if your daughter never went through puberty. If she never started to change, if she
Interesting.
was a child until her, 30s and 40s, that would be terribly concerning. You'd be knocking and calling and making doctor's appointments because this is a normal milestone. And so your readiness for it and the trauma around it does not dictate whether it's appropriate or not, right? It is appropriate. The only thing you can change is how you respond. And so by making sure that you get all of the tools and resources you need to be ready to respond and to show up as that informed, protective adult for your child, that's how you approach this appropriately.
So, what are some of the common questions that girls or young women might have about menstruation that you hear, and how do you suggest caregivers address them?
So, one of the most common questions I hear, especially from patients, is why? Why must I have a
Mm.
period? And it's one of my favorite questions because it speaks to the curiosity and innocence of children, right? And so I tend to say,
Mm.
you know what, that uterus doesn't know much about your dreams or your plans. Doesn't really care if you're wearing a white outfit or not. Doesn't have a calendar. It's just doing what it's here to do. And let's talk about what it's here to do. The uterus is where a baby would be growing if you were to grow a baby, or it's where the period comes from, right? It's an organ that sits low in our pelvis, and it's there because we are the people that are capable of carrying life. On both sides, we got ovaries and they send signals. And so we turn it into essentially a physiology lesson that talks and fits into what they understand about life and existence. They understand that they were born at some point, they had a birthday, and that new people are born all the time, and that this is a necessity in that cycle. And so when you fit it into what makes sense in their life, they say, okay, I get that, fine. But I like to say, it's not that you are required to do this. It is not that it is your life's calling to have children. It is not that that is your only value. Another question they often ask is, well, will it hurt? Will I
Mm.
have pain? And oftentimes they're getting that because they've seen pain. They've seen commercials that talk about period cramps and things, which are good. And we talk about how,
Mm.
while periods are totally normal, there can be discomfort. And this is a great time for me to tell you when I really want you to let someone know because your discomfort's too much. If you can't sleep,
Right.
if you can't go to class, if you can't participate in your sports, that discomfort is too much. And so you need someone to give you
Mm.
medication or give you a heating pad or something to help you with that pain. And then maybe you need to see a doctor about that pain, right? And so I tend to use those questions to counsel, certainly, and to give them understanding and to educate, but to also say, this is what you should do when, or this is what you should do if. So it turns it into a more positive conversation and a conversation that gives them agency to affect change and make sure that they know how to ask for help when they need it.
Love that. And I guess the other question, obviously, that's going to come up time and time again is now what? What should I
Right.
do? Right? Like, how do I handle
Mhm.
this? So, how do you suggest caregivers talk to their children about the next steps
Yeah.
now that it's here?
So I think the simplest, terms are the best ways to move forward. And so, hey, if you're bleeding and we do nothing about it, what happens? Well, we're probably going to get some blood on our favorite shorts. We might get blood on our seat at school. So how can we prevent that? How do we make sure that we take care of that? Well, these are the options. And so I love that narrative. If we do nothing, what does that look like? Are you comfortable with that? Probably
Mhm.
not. So how can we manage that? And so we're managing it in a way that aligns with their personal goals for themselves. So it doesn't feel like this task that someone's making me do. They understand why they're doing it and how that actually is honoring who they are and how they want to show up in the world. So then you can introduce, these are pads. This is what mommy uses sometimes. Or these are tampons. This is something that I use, especially when swimming. And so when you're talking with your kid about next steps, make sure that you're not giving them this prescribed type of instruction that removes them from the picture. Center them, center their values, their desires, and their comforts, and then frame the conversation around that.
Makes so much sense. Again, so wonderful to have you on this show. So excited about your book coming out and really appreciate everything that you're doing for young women and girls everywhere.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for joining
Oh,
us.
thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
What great advice from Dr. Chambers. Here are the top takeaways from today. First, start the conversation early. Introducing the topic of puberty and periods before they begin helps young girls feel confident, not confused. And age-appropriate education helps build trust. Second, caregivers shape the story. Children absorb not just what we say, but how we say it. Approaching the topic with calm, clarity, and compassion helps them feel secure and confident in their bodies. Lastly, normalize, don't minimize. Periods are a healthy milestone, not a burden. Treating them like any other developmental stage helps reduce stigma and supports long-term well-being. Thank you for listening, and please share today's episode with others in your life. Have a great day. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, Check out the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.